Traveling by plane is complicated enough. Security queues, people pushing suitcases as if they were carrying bricks, the eternal fight for space in the luggage compartment. I just wanted to sit down, put on my headphones, and survive the flight without having to interact with anyone. But apparently I wasn't going to be that lucky. Boarding was almost over when she appeared. A brunette woman with huge designer sunglasses, walking as if she were parading on an imaginary red carpet. Her roller suitcase made an annoying noise down the aisle, and the way she looked around made it clear she thought she was the most important person on that plane. And that's when she stopped right next to me. Without even looking at me, she simply dropped her bag in my lap just like that, as if I were a human armrest. I was stunned for a second, trying to understand what was going on. I looked at her, expecting an explanation, and all I got was an impatient look. "Can you leave? This is my place." Her tone was that of someone who was about to lose patience with a waiter who had brought the wrong order. There was just one small detail. That wasn't her seat. It was mine. I looked at my boarding pass, then at the number above the seat, just to make sure I wasn't crazy. I wasn't. But the woman kept staring at me, arms crossed, waiting for me to simply accept her alternative reality and get out of there. "My ticket is for that seat," I replied as calmly as I could. She let out an exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes, as if I was being such a nuisance. It must have been a mistake. I always sit by the window. Ah, that was a new one. Because apparently the airline ticket booking system now worked on the basis of how often you chose a type of seat. If you always sit in the window, it automatically belongs to you forever and ever. From across the aisle, a gray-haired man in a business suit caught my eye and gave me a sympathetic nod. This was Marcus, who I'd struck up a conversation with while waiting to board. He had the aisle seat in the row opposite mine, and I could tell he was watching the situation unfold with growing interest. I just wanted to understand what was going through her head. Did she think I was just going to stand up and say, "Gee, sorry, I didn't know you were the universal owner of window seats"? She waited for me to back down, for me to apologize for daring to occupy her sacred space. But I didn't move, because at that moment I already knew that this story would make for a show of public shame, and I would have a front row seat. The woman, who I later learned was named Victoria, continued to stand in the aisle, arms crossed, as if she was waiting for me to disappear from my seat by some miracle. It was the typical look of someone who has never heard a no in their life. I, on the other hand, was completely comfortable because it was my seat. She sighed loudly, as if she were dealing with a tremendous injustice. Her impatience was almost comical, as if she were sure that the universe had made an unforgivable mistake by allowing someone else to take her place. When she realized that I wasn't just going to evaporate, she decided to try the pity tactic. She put a hand on her chest and tilted her head slightly, adopting that tone of voice that stuck-up people use when they want to manipulate others. "Look, darling, I'm just saying that I prefer to sit by the window. I always sit by the window. I've got used to it, you know? I have anxiety and I need to look out." Marcus caught my attention by clearing his throat and subtly rolling his eyes at Victoria's performance, making it hard for me not to smile. Of course, now it was a question of health. I looked at her, and then at the rest of the plane. I was absolutely certain that no one there gave a damn about this woman's emotional well-being, but to her misfortune, I was the least concerned of all. I didn't answer anything. I just looked at the illuminated sign above her seat, clearly indicating the seat number she was supposed to occupy. The silence was deafening. She realized that I wasn't going to fall for her cheap manipulation, and that's when the show really began. She looked around, trying to find an ally, someone who would sympathize with her terrible suffering, but most of the passengers were more concerned with stowing their bags and settling in for the flight than caring about her chirping. So in a last act of desperation, she decided she needed an authority figure, and who better to solve the problem than the crew? With dramatic steps, she turned and called the nearest flight attendant, already pointing her finger at me as if she were reporting a crime. "Ma'am, that man is in my seat." The plane hadn't even taken off yet, but I already knew that this trip was going to be more fun than I had imagined. And when Victoria called the flight attendant, I knew it was going to be an award-worthy spectacle. The crew member, a short woman with a nameplate reading Olivia, and a professional smile trained to deal with crazy people, walked up to us calmly. Clearly, she had seen this kind of scene before. Victoria immediately assumed the posture of a victim, putting her hand to her chest, as if she were on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She really thought that the flight attendant was going to solve the problem in her favor. "That man is in my seat." Olivia blinked slowly. She looked at me, looked at Victoria, then she looked at the numbers above the seats. "Ma'am, can I see your ticket?" Victoria rolled her eyes, irritated, as if it was absurd for someone to ask for that kind of proof, but she still reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the ticket. I already knew what was coming next. The flight attendant checked the ticket, compared the numbering, and let out a discreet sigh, the kind you give when you realize you're going to have to deal with human stupidity before you've even had breakfast. She handed the ticket back to Victoria and spoke calmly. "Madam, your seat is in the middle." And there, in that instant, I saw this woman's soul leaving her body. She froze. Her face turned red, then white, then red again. The naked truth hit her hard. She never had any right to the window. She only thought she could take what she wanted, because she had always been used to it. But instead of accepting that she had been embarrassed, and simply sitting in the damn middle seat, she decided to make it worse. She widened her eyes in shock and began to gesture as if the flight attendant had just told her that she had to travel in the luggage compartment. "That's a mistake. I always sit at the window." Marcus caught my eye again and mouthed, "Is this for real?" before shaking his head in disbelief. The whole plane listened now. She had an audience. Passengers began to turn their heads, interested in the discussion. Some held back their laughter, others just crossed their arms, waiting to see how far the clowning would go. Olivia kept her professional smile but took a step to the side, indicating that Victoria should sit down at once. Of course, she wasn't going to accept defeat so easily. "I demand to speak to someone higher up." There you go. Now Victoria wanted to involve the pilot, and right then and there, I realized that she was digging her own grave with her own hands. The whole plane was already paying attention to her. What had once been a ridiculous whim had become a spectacle of public shame. Victoria stood there motionless, taking deep breaths, as if trying to gather her strength for the next attack, because in her mind, this was not yet a defeat. She believed that if she insisted enough, the universe would bend to her will, and a window seat would magically appear. But unfortunately for her, the real world doesn't work like that. Olivia, no longer patient, simply pointed to the middle seat and said with all the calm in the world, "Ma'am, please, take your seat so we can take off." It was her last chance to save a little dignity, but she didn't take it. "I demand to speak to the pilot." Ah, that's it. The final blow of humiliation. The entire plane reacted. Some passengers let out low chuckles, others just looked at each other, as if asking if they had really heard that. Did she really think the pilot was going to leave the cabin to settle a row over a seat? And then came the great irony, because Olivia, keeping the same professional smile, simply picked up the phone and called a superior. But it wasn't the pilot. 2 minutes later, 2 airline security guards appeared. Yes, she wanted an authority. Well, now she had 2. The men stood next to Olivia, looking at Victoria, as if they were assessing whether or not a passenger was going to be a problem. And Victoria finally realized that she had crossed the line. Her face lost all its arrogance and was filled with panic. Until then, she had thought she was in control of the situation, but now things were completely out of her hands. The security guards didn't raise their voices, didn't make any threats. They just stood there, waiting. She looked around for support, but no one on the plane was on her side. No one. She knew there was no way out, but she still tried one last pathetic move to come out as a victim. "This is absurd. I paid for this flight." One of the security guards just raised an eyebrow and replied dryly, "And now you can choose whether you want to take this flight or get off it." That's it. Game over. You could see in her eyes that at that moment she knew she had lost. But the most beautiful thing of all, the ending was going to get even better, because this woman, who thought she was too important to sit in the middle seat, was about to discover the only seat left for her on that plane. From his seat across the aisle, Marcus gave me a discreet thumbs up, clearly enjoying the spectacle as much as I was. The whole plane was silent, waiting to see what Victoria's next move would be. It was no longer just about a seat. Now it was a question of pride. She knew that any choice she made from then on would be a humiliation. The security guards continued to stand by, unhurriedly looking at her as if they had seen this kind of scene 1,000 times before. And they probably had. Victoria looked at the middle seat, the place she should have occupied from the start. Now, to sit there would be to admit that she had lost, and I knew she wouldn't be able to swallow that defeat. She looked around, perhaps hoping that someone would intervene on her behalf, but no one moved. The passengers who had only been watching discreetly before now didn't even pretend to hide their interest anymore. The man in the next row crossed his arms and let out a little smile. A woman in front pretended to be reading, but was clearly paying attention. Even a teenager at the window was holding back his laughter. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to hold in her frustration, but it was too late. She could no longer pretend to be the victim. Now she was just a nuisance who was delaying the flight. That's when one of the security guards made the final announcement. "Ma'am, last chance. Either take your seat or disembark now." You could see her soul leaving her body. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it. She had nothing more to say. So in a final act of defiance, she picked up her bag, turned on her heels, and marched towards the exit. Yes, she'd rather get off the plane than admit she was wrong. The passengers watched as she disappeared down the aisle, and as soon as the security guards confirmed that she was gone, a sense of relief filled the cabin. Some people laughed quietly, others shook their heads in pure contempt. The best moment came when Marcus commented loudly, without a hint of pity, "I guess she got a new seat after all," causing several nearby passengers to burst into laughter. Olivia confirmed that the flight was ready to take off. And finally, the doors were closed. Now, with the middle seat empty and an indescribable peace surrounding me, I leaned against the window, closed my eyes, and enjoyed the quiet flight, because in the end, the only seat left for her was the one in the departure lounge. Have you ever had to deal with one of these entitled people in your life? Let us know in the comments, and if you like this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Want to see more videos like this? Click on the card and enjoy. See you in the next one.